Greetings from the Sock Springer Film Productions here. Today we're going to talk about the endocrine system, and those are the glands in the body that are ductless. There's also the exocrine glands, and we've kind of mentioned those off and on throughout the year, and especially if you remember when we talked about tissues back in September. The endocrine glands don't have a little tube coming out of them. Exocrine glands do. And for right now, we'll center on the endocrine types. And we'll start kind of from the bottom of the body here and work our way up. Some of the first ones. So I've got a model here of the female reproductive system. And you've got the ovaries on each side. And naturally with the reproductive system, we'll talk about egg production and that end of it there. But with the endocrine system, these are kind of dual functioning organs. The ovaries are going to be producing estrogen and progesterone. And that works it into the body, and that regulates the female's secondary sex characteristics. And those would involve the development of the mammary glands, regulation of the menstrual cycle. These are all estrogen type things here, production of the ovum, and development of the female figure with the narrower waist, wider hips, fatty deposition on the hip areas, and things like that. Progesterone, on the other hand, inhibits the contractions prior to delivery. It also inhibits milk production prior to the birth of the baby, and it also increases the blood supply to the developing fetus in there. So that's the ovaries. And that material is secreted directly into the bloodstream. On the other hand, with the males, then you would have, and we don't have on this model here, but the testes would be in the scrotum down below, and they're located outside the abdominal cavity, mainly for sperm production is the reason there. As far as the endocrine function for the testes go, that involves production of testosterone, and that's the hormone that's going to control male secondary sex characteristics. That would involve things like growth of facial hair, armpit hair, which by the way estrogen does that also too. Goes into development of the sex organs, enhances sperm production, muscle buildup in the body, and males tend to have a little higher oil production too, which if you ever notice going through junior high and high school, males tend to have more zits than females. But those are all secondary sex characteristics of testosterone. As we move up the body then, the kidneys are located back around this area here, one on each side. Now the kidneys themselves are another organ that is working with the excretory or the renal system, but the part we're concerned about is this little cap-like structure that's on top of the kidney, and that's the adrenal gland. And if you notice, there are two different sets of coloration here. You got this mid area here, that's the renal medulla, and then the outer part here is the adrenal cortex. I think I said renal, but that should be adrenal medulla. And they are involved with production of a variety of steroids that the body uses, and also the production of epinephrine and norepinephrine, or a lot of times we know those as adrenaline and non-adrenaline. The flight and response towards that, if you get scared by something, really excited about things, you get a rush of adrenaline. It gets kicked right into your bloodstream and it just takes off just like that. You got to have the body come down some way naturally, or you'd be constantly wore out from the pumping of the adrenaline in there. And so you've got the non-adrenaline or norepinephrine that takes effect there to kind of bring things back to normal. The steroids, you hear about steroids in a bad context, but we naturally make them because our bodies have to utilize proteins in certain ways. So that takes place between this area right in here. Then as we move up the body a little bit further, we get into this area here. And on the torso model, you can see the little strip down here. Well, that's the pancreas. If we look at it a little more closely, an expanded model here, which technically this should be this way here with the spleen here. The bulk of the pancreas is an exocrine gland. Little areas on the pancreas, though, known as the islets of Langerhans, are involved in production of insulin. And insulin helps with the body in this regulation of blood sugar. And if you don't have enough of that being produced, you end up being diabetic. If you've got too much being produced, it tends to run the body sugar through you rather quickly, and you really feel fatigued. A lot of the symptoms are going to be the same, but in the long run, if you're running low on insulin, you're going to end up with a problem. And that's where you hear about people taking the shots and categorized as, type 1, type 2 diabetes. Okay, moving up the body. Then we get into the area of the heart, and you don't see it on these models here, but there is a gland that kind of drapes over the top part. It's located in the mediastinum also, but it's the thymus gland, and that works closely with the lymph system. That's a big deal in little kids. In fact, the gland is fairly large in them, but it helps promote their immunity. Tends to decrease in size and function. As far as they know right now, there's a lot of things that there's still a little bit of a mystery. But like I said, it helps with the immune system and probably develops it to the point there that possibly don't need it as much as an adult. Okay, then we move up to the throat area. Right in here, you got kind of this U band-shaped gland right up in close to the Adam's apple. And that, along with the parathyroids, which are not on here, but they would be like 4 little glandular structures there, and right in those spots, and they all help regulate body metabolism. And the big one is to do with the use of calcium in the body, so that to maintain things. If this thing goes out of whack, then you hear about people developing a goiter where it can actually enlarge. If you Google goiters, you'll end up seeing some real dramatic cases. In fact, there's one individual that I saw when I Google it that has a thyroid gland clear out to here. Surgery would have to take use. They sometimes supplement it with thyroxine tablets to help take care of things, but body metabolism is a key point with that one right there. Okay, as we go up higher, then we get into the brain. And with the brain, you have a few things. These are all really small, bunched in there. Down towards the bottom here, you get a small gland, and it's separated into 2 parts, kind of like the adrenal glands were. And that's the pituitary gland with an anterior and a posterior end. That is also referred to as the master gland, and it's involved in producing a variety of materials. Follicle stimulating hormone is one big one concerning the females, and with both sexes, growth hormone, or GH, is another one that's going to regulate how fast and ultimately genetically tied in also, how tall you're going to end up being. Okay, a little ways towards the back then, you're going to end up with a pineal gland in this area, and that helps regulate your biorhythms or your circadian rhythms with the body, and those involved with waking up, a lot of your normal daily activities, when you go to the bathroom, when you like to eat, things like that. And we saw the video on that on bioclocks earlier in the year. And a very small gland plays a significant role in a lot of the other mammals, and then especially in birds. Helps their directional type abilities. Okay, up in the mid area, right in here, you've got a collection of 3 things. You've got the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, and the thalamus glands. Now, the thalamus and I shouldn't say glands, areas, but the thalamus and the hippocampus are regulated in taking care of messages from the brain. The hippocampus deals with space organization and memory, and then the thalamus works with translating impulses that come into it. But then behind those, up in this area here, would be the hypothalamus. And that works kind of with the pineal gland in that it regulates your sleep, your internal body temperature, and your appetite. So, I mean, you've got a clock that tells you when you want to eat, but then how much you want to eat is also involved in there. And so, tiny little structures right in there. The glands that are in the brain are a lot smaller than the other glands in the body. And the thalamus also helps regulate what's being done with a lot of the brain. And that will take care of our explanation on the endocrine glands. Next up, we will hit the exocrine glands.